there's a lot of people who talk about how it's possible for a person to lose their salvation. Could you say some words to that?
I used to think that way too. In fact, when I was probably an early teenager, I was firmly in the belief that if you committed certain sins, you would lose your salvation. And so we would pray often, and not being able to remember everything we've ever done, we'd have to throw in some extra lines in our prayer, like, if there's anything I've forgotten, please forgive me for that. And we always had a sense of kind of a fear that maybe we've crossed over some line. And we just never knew for sure where we were, because fear controlled us. But the Lord says, He sent the Son into the world that whoever believed on Him would have everlasting life. Simple question, how long is everlasting? And if something could happen to what was everlasting, then it's not everlasting, is it? It would make no sense to say God has given you something that's everlasting, only it's only going to last for a certain length of time. Then we shouldn't use the word everlasting.
Or under certain conditions.
Yeah, we should change that. God sent the Son that whosoever believed in Him would temporarily have an existence with God in the hopes that nothing goes wrong. Not a very good interpretation of that verse. But what we need to realize to make sense out of this is that salvation involves a change of who we are. It's pictured beautifully when ancient Israel was slaves in Egypt under the dominion of Pharaoh. They'd been there for 430 years. And so everyone who lived there, their entire life was a slave life. They were born a slave. Their father was a slave. Their grandfather was a slave, clear back for 430 years. And they had no hope of ever changing. They were going to be slaves. That's all they could do. Now what slaves do is the will of the slave master. They're not allowed to exercise their own will. They just do what they're made to do. If they don't do it, they get beat. That's what whips were for. And the retirement program is you work till you die. And there's no rest, there's no vacations, there's no hope. Just a terrible, terrible existence. And that pictures our life. Descendants of Adam, slaves to sin. But one day God sent Moses down and said, I'm going to rescue my people. I've heard them crying, and I don't want them to be there anymore. And through the story of the plagues and all that, God finally brought them out. And He brought them in a very interesting way. We have what's called a Passover, a time when God said, you're to offer a lamb as an atonement for sin. And you're to put His blood on the doorways of the little slave house that you live in. And then He said, I'm going to send death angels over the land. The death angel is a force that God sends out on a mission, and the mission was kill the firstborn of every living thing in Egypt. Kill everything, the firstborn of every animal, every family, all the way up to Pharaoh's own household. Now those angels went out, and nothing in all the world could stop them from doing what they came to do. They were to kill the firstborn. And they would come to Israel, and they'd kill the firstborn of all the Israelites, except God said, put the blood of the lamb over the door, and I myself will hover over you. I will stand guard over your house. When the death angels come, they'll find me standing guard at your house. They will come to kill, but they cannot come in because I will be there standing guard over you. So the door that was painted with blood, which had formerly been just a doorway into another day of slave labor and misery, or a day way back into a short night's rest, only to go back out in the morning again forever. That doorway was sanctified by the blood of the Lamb, and it became a doorway to freedom. And they were to only go through it one time, and every member of their family was to go. First they ate the lamb, and then they went out through that door, and they would never again go back into that door. That was their one and last time that they would go through that sanctified door. Now, they didn't know it, and Pharaoh didn't know it, but they have already made their very last brick for Pharaoh. They will never work another day for Pharaoh. But now they came to the Red Sea after a 3-day hike. Remember, 3 days means dying. They were dying to their old life of slavery. And so they came to the Red Sea. They had a confused idea about what God was doing. So here was their theological statement at the Red Sea. God has brought us out here to destroy us. Because they looked straight ahead, all they saw was the sea. No way to cross it. To the left was burning desert. To the right was burning desert. And coming behind them was Pharaoh's army, bent on killing or recapturing. They saw themselves in a trap they could not get out of. And they began to scream out to God, "Why have you brought us out here to kill us?" And God just said, "Stand still." Like, shut up and listen and watch. I'm going to show you something. And he said, "I'm going to show you salvation." The Hebrew word for salvation is Yeshua. And Yeshua, translated into Greek, is Jesus. He said, "Today I'm going to show you Jesus." And what they saw was an amazing thing. When Moses held out his staff, the water divided, and they saw a dry land path through the sea out of Egypt and into a place where they would now, for the first time in all their life, be able to do just what God said to do. Their troubles weren't over. They went right back into idolatry very soon after that. But God never again referred to them as slaves. They were always my people. Even when they were in idolatry, he said, "My people are in idolatry." They became God's people because they left the position of slavery and entered into a relationship with God, where God would have to teach them a lot of lessons, and they would have to go through a lot of things that were troublesome and horrible situations, but always under God's direction and for his purposes only. Pharaoh no longer had any control whatsoever over him. And God said, "From this day you'll never see your enemies again." That word "never" is a long, long time. And he said, "I've brought you into an everlasting covenant with God." There again, everlasting. Even though they suffered much, many of them died in the wilderness because of their rebellion, and they had to pay a terrible price for idolatry. God never ever abandoned them and brought them in. And now today, probably at least 3,500 years later, Israel still rattles the whole world. The world, every day's news, something about Israel, and the world doesn't know what to do with them. The enemy has been trying for centuries to destroy them. Never can do it because God has a handle on them, and they are a picture of the Lord's people. And that's why I've come to the conclusion, you cannot lose your salvation, because the day you lose your salvation, then God has abandoned his own covenant. And he said over and over, "I will never, ever abandon my covenant."